There was a time when yachting was not about luxury brands or social media posts, when owning a boat meant working on it with your own hands, when sailing somewhere took planning, patience, and real skill. If you lived through those years, you remember what made it different. If you did not, it is worth understanding what the water used to feel like. The 1970s were the last decade when yachting felt truly adventurous. Not exclusive, not polished, but raw and real. And by the end of this, you will understand why so many sailors still miss it, even now. Before GPS and autopilot, every voyage required you to be present. Navigation meant charts. Paper charts that you marked with a pencil, compasses that you checked constantly, and dead reckoning based on speed, time, and direction. You could not just punch in coordinates and let the boat handle the rest. You had to know where you were, and if you did not, you learned fast. Weather forecasts came from the radio, short broadcasts at specific times. You listened carefully and wrote down the information. You made your own judgments about whether to go or stay. There was no hourly update, no radar map on your phone. It was just you, the information you gathered, and your experience. That made every decision feel weighty and important because it was. Boats themselves were different, simpler. Most recreational yachts in the 70s were between 30 and 40 feet. Fiberglass was becoming standard, replacing wood. But they were not floating condos. They were designed for sailing, not lounging. The interiors were compact, efficient. A small galley, a fold-down table, berths that doubled as seating during the day, maybe a tiny head. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. You did not have air conditioning. You did not have refrigeration unless you installed it yourself. You had ice boxes. You planned your provisions accordingly. Fresh food for the first few days. Canned goods after that. And here is what that created. Self-reliance. You learned to maintain your own boat. Not because you wanted to, because you had to. Engines were simpler, mechanical, not computerized. If something broke, you could often fix it yourself, with basic tools, with some patience, with trial and error. People carried spare parts, extra line, duct tape, hose clamps, WD-40. You developed an instinct for what might fail and how to jury-rig a solution. That was not seen as amateur. It was seen as competent. Marinas were different too. Smaller, less developed. They did not have resort amenities. No restaurants, no pools, no concierge service. Just docks, water, and maybe electricity. But they had something else. Community. Sailors helped each other. Naturally. Constantly. If you saw someone struggling with a line, you helped. If someone needed a tool, you lent it. If a boat was in trouble, you went. There was an unspoken code. The water could be dangerous, so sailors looked out for each other. Not for reward, not for recognition, because that is what you did. Evenings in the marina meant gathering, on each other's boats, on the dock, sharing stories, comparing notes about anchorages, warning about hazards, recommending routes. People brought drinks, simple snacks. Nobody tried to impress anyone. You sat in folding chairs, or on the deck, or on dock boxes, and you talked. Here is what made those conversations different. Everyone there had done the work. You could not fake being a sailor in the 70s. You could not hire someone to do everything for you and then claim the experience. If you pulled into a harbor, people knew you had gotten yourself there, that you had navigated, that you had handled the boat in open water. That created respect, mutual respect, not based on the size of your yacht, not based on how much you spent, but based on competence, on seamanship, on what you could actually do. Racing was popular. It was not corporate sponsored. It was club racing, local racing. People in similar boats competed for trophies that cost $20, for bragging rights, and for the pure satisfaction of sailing well. You prepped your own boat. You recruited your own crew, often friends or family, people who wanted to learn. You taught them on the water how to trim sails, how to read wind shifts, and how to work as a team. The boats were not optimized. They were not carbon fiber. They were not fine-tuned machines. They were production boats, everyday boats. And the racing was about skill, not equipment. After the race, everyone gathered. Winning crew and losing crew, it did not matter. You told stories, argued about calls, laughed about mistakes, and planned for next week. Cruising had a different feeling too. You couldn't just look up every anchorage on an app. You used cruising guides, thick books with hand-drawn charts, written descriptions, and sometimes photos if you were lucky. The information was basic: depth, holding, nearby hazards, what the bottom was like, and whether it was protected from which winds. You filled in the rest yourself. Finding a good anchorage felt like discovery, even if other boats had been there before, even if it was in the guidebook. You had navigated there yourself. You read the water, chose your spot, and set your anchor. If it held through the night, you'd done it right. Anchoring was a real skill. You did not have a button that dropped the anchor and stopped the boat automatically. You coordinated with your crew. One person on the helm, one person on the bow. Hand signals and shouted instructions carried over the wind. You backed down on the anchor to set it. You felt the chain. You judged whether it was holding or dragging. You took bearings on shore to check if you were moving. It required attention, communication, and experience. And when you got it right, when you woke up in the same spot you fell asleep, there was satisfaction in that. Nights at anchor were quiet, deeply quiet. No generator running, no TV playing, just the sound of water against the hull. Rigging clinking gently in the breeze, maybe voices carrying across the water from another boat. You read by oil lamp or battery lantern. You played cards. You talked. You listened to the VHF radio for weather updates or distress calls. You went to bed when it got dark. You woke with the sun. The rhythm was natural, dictated by light, by tide, by wind, not by schedule or agenda. Provisioning for a cruise meant planning, real planning. You could not just stop at a marina store every day. Many anchorages were remote. No services, no stores, no restaurants. You brought what you needed, calculated how much water you would use, how much fuel, how many meals. You rationed without thinking about it, not because you were suffering, because you were being sensible. Fresh water was precious. You did not take long showers. You washed dishes in salt water. You learned to do more with less, and that felt fine, and that felt normal. Communication was limited. Some boats had single sideband radios, expensive, complex. You could reach shore stations, check in with family once a week maybe. Let them know you were safe. Most people did not have that. You told people before you left where you were going and when you would be back. And they trusted you would get there. And you did. That isolation was part of the appeal. You were unreachable, completely. No one could call you. No one could email you. No one could find you unless they sailed to where you were. It forced you to be present, to deal with whatever happened with the resources you had, the people you were with, your own judgment. And here is what people remember most: that sense of genuine adventure. Every passage felt real. You were responsible for getting yourself there safely. You watched the weather. You planned your route. You stood watches through the night. You navigated by the stars when you could see them, by instruments when you could not. When you arrived, you had earned it. The harbor, the anchorage, the island. You had not just paid for access, you had sailed there. And that distinction mattered deeply. By the late 1970s, things were beginning to change. Electronics were getting better, more reliable, more affordable. LORAN was becoming common. GPS was in development. Autopilots were improving. The boats were getting more comfortable, more like floating apartments. The sport was becoming more accessible, which was good in many ways. More people could participate. But something was shifting. The barrier to entry was lowering, and the skills required were decreasing. You could rely more on equipment and less on ability. Here's why that mattered. The difficulty was the point. The 70s were the last decade when yachting required you to develop real competence. You could not just buy your way onto the water. The learning curve was steep, and everyone climbed it together. After that, technology did more of the work. Boats became easier to handle. Navigation became automated. Communication became instant. The experience became more comfortable, more convenient, more predictable. So if you sailed in the 70s, you caught the end of something. The last era when yachting felt truly self-sufficient. Going to sea meant relying on yourself, your crew, your skills, nothing else. It was not romantic then. It was just sailing. But looking back now, it is clear. That was when it meant the most. People who sailed in the 70s do not usually talk about the boats they owned. They talk about what they learned, what they figured out, and how they handled situations when things went wrong. Things went wrong. Often. Engines quit, sails tore, weather turned, and you dealt with it, out there, with what you had. That built confidence, real confidence, not the kind that comes from writing a check, the kind that comes from solving problems, from making it through, from proving to yourself that you could handle it. There was a particular satisfaction in bringing your boat home after a long cruise. Tired, maybe a little weathered, but safe. You had navigated challenges, made decisions, and kept everyone aboard secure. And when you tied up at the dock, when you shut down the engine, there was a quiet pride in that. You had done it. Not a captain you hired, not a navigation system. You. The friendships formed on boats lasted because you had been through things together. Shared night watches, weathered storms, anchored in remote coves, and solved problems as a team. Those experiences bonded people in ways that casual acquaintances never achieved. You knew who stayed calm under pressure, who could be relied on, who had your back when things got difficult. We cannot go back, of course. Technology has moved forward. Safety has improved. More people can experience sailing now. That is valuable. That matters. But something was traded away. The necessity of real skill. The isolation that forced presence. The self-reliance that built character. The community that formed around shared challenges. The yachting of the 1970s was not glamorous. It was not easy. It was not always comfortable. But it was authentic. It was earned. It demanded something from you, and in return, it gave you something that could not be bought. If you remember those days, you know what that felt like. If you do not, it is hard to explain. But it was real, and it shaped everyone who experienced it. Because sometimes, the best adventures are the ones that require everything you have.